Hey everyone, welcome back to Empire Secrets. I'm your host, Mariana Henninger, and today, like most days, we're going to dive into a really ninja marketing tactic that you've never heard about. This is what we do if you're new to the show. And if you're not new to the show, you're like, Mariana, I already know this. Let's go. Today on the show, I've got Adam Chronister. He is an entrepreneur, investor, digital marketing strategist. And I'm going to name a couple other things about him, but I will say Adam and I met in person in Cancun at the Commitment Summit. And Adam has a whole system that he's going to share with us today. He's also the founder of Enleaf, which is an award-winning West Coast marketing agency. It's been recognized as one of the top firms in the Pacific Northwest. He's based in Spokane. And he is named MSN's top 10 disruptive entrepreneurs to watch in 2025. So Adam, without further ado, I want to know, tell us a little bit about your agency, which has a really interesting vertical that you actually specialize in addition to other verticals that you serve. But then tell us how you came to really discover or figure out how to get your brand featured inside of chat or other AI models. And I'm like fumbling with the word. What do I call these?
Yeah, so a little bit about Enleaf. We have been around since around 2009. Really heavy focus, as you mentioned, on search marketing. And what I mean by that, and the reason I use that moniker more and more often, is because search marketing is changing. Right? We
Mm.
have in the past, like, very much carved out a space in, or a kind of like credibility in the search engine optimization space. But as you kind of alluded to, like, that vertical is starting to change and expand with large language models, right? The way that people find things is continually expanding from, searching in social media platforms or YouTube to now large language models and diverse search engines. And so I would say that's one of our specialties as a discipline, is allowing people and their websites, their intellectual property, to more prominently show up in all of these search systems, right? We work across a lot of different verticals. If you name it, we've probably dealt in it. But some of the verticals that I would say specialize in is travel, hospitality, and what I call real estate adjacent verticals. So this is everything from your real estate broker to property management companies, home flippers. Those are verticals that seem to work well with kind of our frameworks, right?
So you help people get found regardless of
Exactly.
where
Yeah.
people are looking for your services and what you offer. Obviously, well, I want to actually talk about SEO for a little bit, sort of traditional SEO.
Sure.
If our audience are coaches and course creators, so folks with an online business, so getting found online is obviously really important for them. But obviously, time is not an unlimited resource.
Of
So,
course. Yeah.
if you only had 30 minutes a week to invest on SEO, what are the exact steps that someone should take? What are the highest leverage things that people can do to get
Mhm.
featured? And we're just going to start with sort of traditional SEO
Sure.
ranking on Google.
Yeah. I would back up. Instead of saying systems, I would say probably the most underutilized opportunity to show up in traditional search, and this does bleed into large language models, is what happens in your website, right? We often have conversations. In fact, I literally just got off a call with a company who's got a pretty broad winery across the Pacific Northwest, and they just relaunched a website. Website looks pretty decent, right? But instantly saw a drop in their rankings and, as a result, some
Oh,
traffic, right?
mhm.
And this is unfortunately an all too common scenario where either businesses don't have the proper infrastructure as part of how they set up their website, or maybe they redesign a site, but not factoring in some of the legacy traffic and authority. And so I would say all of this really starts with the infrastructure and framework that your website is built on, right? It's very difficult to be prominent in search if you have, say, a one page lander website, right? Because it doesn't give the search engines, and this would echo to large language models, it doesn't give them enough contextual relevance to cling onto. So what I like to tell clients and prospects is every single page on your website is an opportunity to rank for one or many terms, right?
Mm.
And so you want to have a lot of this forethought built into your website, or implanted into it later if you haven't come to that scenario. So I think that's the biggest missed opportunity, is working with a company or a series of companies that can either build your website with that infrastructure and that foresight in mind, or, if you're working with a web development company that doesn't have the data science, search marketing expertise, have somebody come in as a support mechanism to build that website in the right form and
Mm-hmm.
fashion. Because you can
So,
have,
yeah.
you can have the most brilliant website, but if you don't have that stuff in place, it's going to impede everything you do thereafter, right?
And when you say that stuff in place, like what are like the really practical things that we should be looking out for? I'm not an SEO expert, but I do know things like backlinks are
Mm-hmm.
important. What you write in your heading is important. Having the right keywords. Are there like very specific things that we need to be thinking about if we're redesigning our site or wanting to rank higher?
Yeah, one of the very first things that we look at is actually keyword research, right? We like to understand, even before we start building a website, what terms related to your product or service is your audience looking for, right? And once we have that roadmap of, we know keyword A has, X amount of search volume, now we can peg that to a page on your website. Maybe it's a service page, a product page, maybe your
Mm,
home page. So ideally, every page on your website should have an anchor keyword or kind of synonym roadmap, so that
mm-hmm.
you know that, hey, this page I want it to show up prominently for this term, and that page I want prominently to show up for that term, right? And so just creating a website, without any of that foreknowledge, it could be the most beautiful, compelling, conversion optimized website on the planet, but if it never gets traffic, then it's essentially invisible, right?
Right.
So it
And
starts out with keyword research, and then we look at things like framework, right? A lot of things that I see, for instance, I might see a business that offers, maybe, let's say, 5 to 10 services. Instead of creating separate pages for each service, they consolidate it to one single page. Well, that causes confusion to the search engines, because they're like, hey, I see one page with a
mm-hmm.
bunch of different references to different services. So only one of those service keywords is going to be more prominent in search. All the other service terms are going to be less relevant. So
Mm-hmm.
that's an example where we would want to break those out into separate pages with separate emphasis, make sure the word count, the synonyms, the metadata, all of that stuff is siloed for the most visibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
And
other
yeah.
analogy I like to use is, it's almost like fishing. You could go out and catch a really big fish, but instead you could catch a huge net of smaller fish and have a much more abundant, take home, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that as you are evaluating and or looking at a website and seeing how they can improve in terms
Mhm.
of SEO, are you having to juggle that customer experience aspect of it as well? So maybe from a customer experience aspect, it's better for them to see all the options in one place
Sure.
versus having a page for each, or do you eventually do both, right, where you have one page where everything exists and then you can
Mhm.
click from there to each individual service? Would that work as well for SEO purposes?
Well, there are sometimes challenges with that I think we measure fairly well. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, one of the tools in our toolbox as a SEO practitioner or company doing SEO is going to be content, right? Search
Mm,
engines and now large language models look at contextual relevance. And so sometimes that means that I have to have a pretty heavy amount of keywords or terms, sentences, and paragraphs on a homepage, maybe beyond what a more aesthetic company would like to see, right? And so there are
mm,
tools and tricks for that. A lot of times we'll use things like hamburger menus, or
mhm,
different CSS tricks that kind of allow you to expand and contract text.
mm,
Like, so there are ways to embed and incorporate content into a site while not having a wall of text, because nobody
mhm,
wants to see a wall of text. But at the same time, that is that content is what those systems cling on to, right? And then there's other things like metadata, meta titles, meta descriptions, there's schema markup.
Mm-hmm.
There's image alt text.
Yeah.
Basically, at the end of the day, we have to understand that crawlers, they look at and parse websites differently than you and I, right? They can't just see an image and instantly recognize what it is. Now they are getting better at this, and so this is becoming more and more, these crawlers are becoming more and more human like day by day. But at the same time, the way that they parse and understand information is, it is different than the human
Mm-hmm.
would, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's talk about the shifts that are happening in the way that people search, right?
Sure.
Clearly, you might know more data around this than me, but even anecdotally,
Mm-hmm.
both for myself, people around me, folks are using less traditional search engines to find
Right.
information.
Yep.
You've got Google's AI overview, blurb, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously they're going directly to the language models to search to find
Right.
answers to their problem, and which isn't always successful. I just saw, I think it was on my feed. It wasn't like in the news or anything, but this influencer who had used chat to ask it whether she needed a visa to go into a specific country. I don't remember which.
Mm.
And chat had told her, nope, you don't need a visa. And then sure
Uh-oh.
enough, she went to the
Oh
airport,
no.
got on the plane, got off the plane, couldn't get in the country, had to go
Oh
back.
man.
And so, obviously not everything is super reliable. But in
Mm.
terms of, finding businesses that LLMs are pointing people to, right?
Yeah.
Brands, businesses, websites. How does that work, Adam? I know I was so blown away by what you were sharing with me in person at the
Mm-hmm.
conference. Break it down for people, both the shift in behavior in
Yeah.
terms of how people are searching, but even, obviously really importantly, how can we leverage that for our own businesses?
Right. So there are some changes that are happening. Obviously, like the way that we search in a large language model is going to typically differ than what we've traditionally done in search, in generalized search, right? I mean, a long tail keyword used to be considered like plumber near me, right? Or
Mm,
best plumber near me. That used to be considered what's called a long tail keyword instead of plumber, which is not a
right.
long tail keyword. And now, like, using LLM systems, we might type, I'm looking for a plumber near me based in Seattle, Washington, who is an expert in A, B, and C, whose price point is, between X and Y, right?
Oh, that's crazy.
And so basically the consumer is being trained because of the way these systems work to search more, more in depth. And so that does a couple things, right, in this whole scenario. The first thing is a deficit. We're seeing that there's a lot of things, for instance, the AI overviews in Google that actually are pulling back the amount of rankings and, well, not so much rankings, but like click through rate, right?
Mm,
We've seen a lot of our clients' click through rate, the rate at which people click on through from the search results to a website, actually decrease as these things become more prominent. Um, but on the flip side, what we've seen and actually heard across the industry is that even though the quantity of traffic seems to, as an aggregate, be decreasing, the quality for a lot of verticals is actually going up, right?
mm,
And it makes sense because if you have a more definitive definition of what you're looking for, you're going to spend less time and have more of that buyer intent built in, so that when you
mhm,
do convert from those super long tail searches, your inclination to buy or to transact is typically higher. And so
mhm,
that's the pro and con that we're seeing, right? Basically, the other differences too between traditional search engines and LLMs is how they prioritize content, right?
mm,
Traditional search engines relied quite heavily on what was called PageRank, which was, eventually obfuscated by Google, at least as far as a public metric. But nonetheless, this is where backlinks, came into play, right? It used to be, and I think this over time will become more and more of a diminishing impact. But it used to be that the quantity of backlinks you had
right.
was one of the big factors in how you showed up. And then over
Mhm,
time, that diminished to the quality of the backlinks, right? And now with LLMs, I think we're getting to a point where, you know, I don't think we're too far off where backlinks are going to have very negligible impact. And it's all going to be based on what I call a consensus model, right? It's essentially what is the consensus of sentiment across the web and social, PR, on your own website, directories, blogs. What is the source of truth in aggregate? Because that's what these LLMs do good is they take a bunch of data, consolidate it, and boil it down to a consensus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, you've kind of led into like, how do we essentially manipulate what shows up in these large language models? The
Mm-hmm.
more simplified answer is to build consensus, right? And there's different ways and tools we can utilize with that. For gosh, about last maybe 24 months, I've been very focused on personal brand and brand building. And I never used to be the guy that was like all about brand. I was the guy that when Gary Vaynerchuk talked about brand, I would roll my eyes. But eventually I came around and I realized like even the search engines pre LLMs started to roll out things like EAT, which is expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, because even they recognize that that is the most unique identifier that predicts if a business is legitimate or not. And
Love
even
that.
though arguably they didn't do it as well as large language models, I mean, and that's, there's some nuance there to that statement. That has been the big push with all these systems is how do we discern legitimacy versus illegitimacy, right? That's the big challenge that
Mm-hmm.
these search engines and search systems have. So again, search engines traditionally use backlinks. A backlink is a vote of confidence. LLMs don't use backlinks for the most part. It's usually consensus. Can I see a wide consensus of information that can be correlated and validated across data points? And then if so, I'm more likely to present that in search, right?
All right. So
So
yeah, tell us, what does consensus look like? So what I'm hearing you say is that LLMs are not looking for backlinks. They're looking for, can I maybe let me see if I can interpret this and you tell me if I'm right or wrong.
sure.
Can I see enough evidence
Mm-hmm.
that this person or this brand or this website, brand, really, this
Mm-hmm.
company, is who they say they are, and that they are good and that they are worthy of being recommended? Can I see enough
Exactly.
evidence
Yep.
of that in every? Okay, so tell us more about what exactly they're looking for, and then
Mm-hmm.
I really want to hear how you explain to me, how we can use that to our advantage. Like, right? How can we actively, in very practical ways, but understand how it works and be able
Yeah.
to leverage that to our own
Mhm.
benefit?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, personally, I think there are legitimate accolades that you can put out there, right? But a lot of branding and PR is kind of the work that you put into it, right? It's
Mm,
it's building a reputation and then telling people about that, right? And so anybody with enough, elbow grease can do that, really. You do good work and then you don't forget to tell the world about it, right? And so that's how I approach PR. And a lot of this really can be done with PR, for instance. We did one case study, and this was for a non-brand. So we have a couple basically dummy businesses out there. They're not
mm,
actual businesses. They really function as test beds for us to test different ideas on. So not our primary brand, but a secondary brand that doesn't really serve an audience. It's just out there on the web to function, at least in the eyes of the search engines and LLMs, as a legitimate business. But really, it's for us internally, it's a test business. We ran one test where we literally all we did is we created a story about how this particular business won a series of accolades in the Austin market, right? And I would never recommend doing this with a legitimate brand. But our,
mm,
our, our thesis was, hey, we just want to say that this business, this Texas based pseudo business, won these awards for the Austin yada yada award, right? Put it into a press release and see what happens. And so we did that, nothing else. And this is a very low cost press release. Put it out there, run it through a syndication network, a few $100s, and waited and did a before and after. And the query that we did on this test was before we said, is business A legit or a good business in their category? The
Mm.
search results basically said, we don't have enough information to discern whether this is a good or bad business, refer to things like Google reviews, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
And after the fact, it said, yes, this is a legitimate business. They are 5-star rated, which we put the Google reviews as a mention in the press release. They're 5-star
Mm.
rated on Google, which was a legitimate, moniker. And then the other awards it also referenced, right? So just by running simply a press release and speaking to accolades in this scenario didn't even actually exist. That was enough to build a consensus. Now, initially, we saw in this case study that those results did degrade, but then as of late, they've actually popped back into search, right?
Mm.
And so some of the other things that we've done to solidify this is, we've worked to actually create listicles or blog posts where we're talking about different accolades, submitting those to third-party sites that take such guest post
Mm.
submissions or listicles, mention that accolade in that post, and then run a press release on top of it, right? So what does this all boil down to? What does this look like for the average business? One, it's like if you have every city, state, county has these awards that you can apply for, right? The local, business awards, right? So number one, if you have the option to get into those systems, do that, right? And number two, make sure that you're running PR about that particular scenario, right? And then make sure that you mention that on your website. And this could literally be something as simple as, let's say you have 5 stars on Google, and let's say you roll out a new product or service. You should be running a press release about that. Talk about in the About Us section of that press release, talk about how you're 5-star rated in Google, right? Or
Mm.
let's say you won a local award in your arena. Like, you have to be telling people about these things, right?
Mm.
We've gotten, just for our own agency, in the practice of running press releases for just about anything and everything we do. In fact, there's a good chance that I'll be writing a press release about appearing on this podcast. And so also making sure that you have a system and a cadence to quickly produce press releases and syndicate them out there. And so that's part of the framework that we've helped create as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's almost like it really pays attention to volume, right?
Yeah,
And obviously the content of that volume, but the idea of all of these different sites sort of echoing the same things about you
right.
help LLMs determine
Mm-hmm.
your trustworthiness, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, Adam, because I know that when I use my own chat to ask for recommendations or more specifically, I think I was doing this to be like, wait, who are my competitors? Because
Mm-hmm.
not that many people do exactly what I do, and so I was
Sure.
curious, like who it was going to consider my competitor,
Right.
and it definitely surfaced people who I follow, and
Mm-hmm.
it got me thinking, like, are they surfacing people? Are they? Is it surfacing people that it knows I've referenced before? And so I'm curious, when you were doing these tests, were you doing them on your own accounts, or were you testing it like all sorts of different accounts, of people who had never typed this ghost company's name into the LLM?
So a lot of what we've started to test is more around the realm of reputation management, right? And so that's kind of where we
Okay.
started this endeavor. As far as like generalized like results, like for non-branded or non-reputation type searches, that is where like other like nuances of like schema markup and website infrastructure, like those things come into play, right?
Mhm.
The other thing I should caveat is that um, a lot of what these search engines or these LLMs inherit is honestly still based on the principles of search engine optimization, right?
Mm.
And so most of our case studies are very much focused around, reputation management and how to essentially, prime the messaging around a brand or an individual's, accolades and aspects of business. That's really kind of where we've delved in, right? But there are other junctures that we're going to be expanding on and testing. The one example is really just kind of what we've been able to prove and repeat up to this juncture.
Okay. And then along those same lines, and to wrap us up, Adam, what are some of the marketing strategies that you feel like are really timeless that, apply regardless of where you're searching? What are things that entrepreneurs should keep in mind kind of for always?
Yeah. I mean, we've already kind of danced around it, and I think it is brand, right?
Mm,
One of the big challenges with large language models, at least at this juncture, is attribution. One thing it's introduced as far as a challenge is making and attributing traffic and conversions, it's basically making it more difficult than it ever used to be. But there used to be a time where there was no attribution. You think back to the
right.
40s and 50s, and we're talking about radio and billboards. Well, how do you attribute a brand, or a brand like Nike? If I see somebody wearing some slick Air Jordans, and that is my juncture to pop into a Foot Locker or even end up on their website, how do you attribute that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's difficult, but at the end of the day, brand is important, right? And so I think brand, coming full circle, is one of those things that is timeless. And so you want to, build your company with that brand in mind, and have that bleed into everything you do, from web design, social media marketing, PR, the works.
That's awesome. Love this. Adam, I know that you have a resource that you would like to share with our listeners, and let us know about that resource and where they can find you to learn more.
Yeah, so I can be found on our website, or a simple search in Google. I'm not hard to find. But if people want to learn more about what we do, you can go to nleaf.com. That's enleaf.com. And we do have a resource. If you go to nleaf.com/dark-PR, we are offering some baseline resources and materials, as well as training that details some of what we've already kind of done and uncovered in this arena of PR in large language models.
Yeah. So, how to use AI to build your brand, hack PR, and become the go-to expert. Such a enticing title. So, I can't wait to check that out. Adam, thanks so much for being on the show, and I look forward to connecting with you, staying in touch with you, and make sure for all our listeners to check out the links below. I'm going to put everything in the show notes, and we will see you on the next episode of Empire Secrets. Bye for now.